Okay, today I'm going to talk about Australian airspace. And in Australia, we've got 5 classes of airspace. We have got what they call Class A, we've got Class C, we've got Class D, we've got Class E, and then there's the uncontrolled airspace. Okay, so we'll deal with the two easiest ones first off, and then hopefully I've got me, by the way, I've got me espresso coffee here, so, oh gee, that's good. Okay, so the first one, let's talk about the easiest one. We'll talk about Class G. Now, what is Class G airspace? It's basically uncontrolled airspace. That's all it is. Now let's just, I'll do up a map. Okay, you see here we've got the VTC, Visual Terminal Chart for Melbourne. And you can see you've got what they call Class Charlie, a whole lot of airspace. You've got Class Echo, So what is uncontrolled airspace? It's basically airspace that's below any controlled airspace. So let's say, for example, I'm at Moorabbin and I fly at 3,000 feet, and I fly in let's say I fly in from Moorabbin, I fly out that way. I'm basically, if I'm flying at 3,500, I straight away past 3 nautical miles at Moorabbin. There you can see I'm in uncontrolled airspace. So now what does that mean? Well, it depends. It depends if you're for a VFR or IFR. Now, if you're VFR aircraft, you're not controlled by any ATC services. And if you are an IFR and uncontrolled airspace, there's still a requirement to talk to ATC. So now, do you need a clearance if you're in uncontrolled airspace? No, you don't need a clearance. Now, being in uncontrolled airspace doesn't necessarily mean you're not provided with any ATC services. For example, here, once again, if I fly in uncontrolled airspace, I can request ATC to give me a service called flight following, and what that says is, if I'm a VFR aircraft and depending on ATC workload, I can ask them to provide me with a what they call flight following, which is basically a traffic information service. Now, ATC are not required to give you that service. And once again, it depends on their workload. So, they will only, and the only information they'll give you is they'll give you traffic information about other IFR aircraft and any other known VFR. In other words, if you ask for traffic information, or should I say flight following, they give you that flight following. First thing they'll do is, of course, they'll ask you to squawk mode Charlie, and then they'll identify you, and then you become known to them. Now, be aware that not everyone requests flight following, so there may be other aircraft which they see on their radar, and they show up as VFR, and they will become unknown. In other words, say the air traffic control will say, Alpha Bravo Charlie, unidentified, unverified VFR aircraft indicating 2,500, 3 miles to, at 11 o'clock, 3 miles, tracking west, so they'll give you that sort of information. So, so that's uncontrolled airspace. Now so really it's, by the way, How there's also, and this is what gets a lot of people out. You can see here in the hang on, I've just got it. I'll get me espresso. Okay. Now you can see in here, I'll just indicate, you've got the Moorabbin control zone here, 3 nautical miles around Moorabbin. You can see that, and you can see, if you can read that, surface to 2,500. In other words, they control the traffic. They don't control, they give information about other traffic, and tower basically controls that area of airspace. Just excuse me for a second. Now, if you're a IFR aircraft, I'll take a step back. Now, Moorabbin Tower is not always open. They have hours of operation, and you can find out what the hours of operation under what they call the facilities guide. It'll tell you the hours of operation. Now, as soon as Moorabbin Tower closes down, all this area around here, 3 nautical miles and up to 2,500, becomes what they call, becomes uncontrolled airspace. So if you're an aircraft, a VFR aircraft, wishing to conduct any flights within this area, or you're starting off and you're taxiing, and you can see here the tower, that's the frequency, but you can see under here, after hours it becomes 118.1. So that's how you know. That's another thing too, that, and I get this all the time when I'm controlling Melbourne Approach. I get guys and they're taxiing at Moorabbin, they give me a call and they're VFR. Well, as a VFR aircraft, you're in Class G, because Moorabbin Tower's not manned. So what I basically tell them is call me air passing 2,500, because if they wish to go up to the north, if they're passing 2,500, they're going to come into Class Charlie airspace. And we'll talk about Class Charlie, which is probably the most complex, or maybe Class D. But yeah, so anyhow, that's how it works for Class G airspace. Okay, so that's the easiest one to remember. Now, the other one here is Class Alpha. And Alpha it's very simplistic. It's really, you can see here, down the bottom right, Alpha, lowest level, flight level 180. Now, Class Alpha airspace, when you're within radar coverage, i.e. in a big airport like Melbourne, and you're within radar coverage, it covers all down here and all this area here, anything above flight level 180. Now, Class Alpha is only reserved for IFR flights. So if you're a VFR and you plan to fly at flight level 190, forget it. You're never gonna, you shouldn't be there. You should always file IFR. So it's only restricted for class, for IFR aircraft, and obviously you need a clearance to fly in there. Okay, now that's it. Remember, it's above flight level 180, within radar coverage. Well, what about when it's not within radar coverage? Let's say, for example, we go to Broome, and we go here. We can see here, Class Alpha, flight level 245. So and Broome is what they call a procedural tower operator. They use procedural control, which is, I won't talk about that, it's beyond the scope of this tutorial. You've got Class Alpha, the lowest level is 245. So when you're outside radar coverage, Class Alpha is above flight level 245. So, and also all aircraft, all being IFR, they all are given separation and they're given an ATC service. So, and there's no speed limits, by the way. So that's basically, and so it's used only for RPT aircraft. So they're the two easiest ones to deal with. Now, as you can see here, let's go back and we'll talk about, so that's the two easiest ones to deal with. Okay, let's get on to the two. You can see all these blue rings, and most of you who fly know what this is all about. It's Class Charlie, often referred to as an upside down wedding cake, and you can see that it steps out, so the further out you go, so 10 nautical miles DME, yeah, and you've got all these weird, so you can see, let's say for example, this is the Melbourne control zone, which is 8 nautical miles, so you can see it goes around this way with the dashed line. So surface to 1500, so as soon as you take off, you're basically Class Charlie, and then it steps up, so it passes between 8 and 10 DME, the lowest level of Class Charlie is 1500, so if you're flying out this way, and then 15 DME, the lowest level is 2.5, and then at 20 DME, goes up to 3.5, and so on. So that's Class Charlie. Now, do you need a clearance? Yes, you do. And that applies to all VFR and IFR aircraft. You need a clearance. You cannot enter Class Charlie airspace. So, and I see it all the time on my net when I'm on VATS pack, they take off, they want to go to Melbourne, they fly in, and you know, they hit 2,500 feet, and they haven't given me a call yet. So, when in reality, if you're an IFR aircraft and you're going from Moorabbin to Melbourne, you should be calling me on the ground, because you're an IFR aircraft, and IFR aircraft in Class Gulf airspace, even though they're not separated, there's no separation required, but you're given a traffic service. So if anybody, when you call up as an IFR in Class G, all you have to say is, you know, you do your taxis, Alpha Bravo Charlie taxis Moorabbin for Melbourne, blah, blah, blah. And I just say, Alpha Bravo Charlie Squawk 4515, no reported IFR. So that's how you do that. But anyhow, that's Class Charlie is your most restrictive. You need a clearance. There are speed restrictions. As most of you know, there's 250 knots indicated below 10,000 feet. Many of you who listen to me, when I identify someone, I say, you know, via the SID climb to flight level 380, cancel speed. And that means cancel your speed restriction, because within Class Charlie, you shouldn't be going more than 250 knots indicated, unless, of course, the air traffic controller removes that speed restriction. So that's, like I said, that's Class Charlie. Once again, VFR, as I've mentioned, VFR and IFR, all both need clearances, and you both need. Now, also there's another thing too. If you're in that VFR aircraft and you're within Class Charlie airspace, there's certain meteorological conditions you must abide by. In other words, if if you're a VFR aircraft, you must maintain 1,500 metres horizontal and 1,000 feet vertical separation from any cloud. And you've got to, if you're at above 10,000 feet, you've got to have visibility of 8 kilometres or more. If you're below 10,000, you must have visibility of 5,000 metres. They are the VMC conditions for Class Charlie. Okay, so, and yeah, I see all sorts of things happening with ATC, but anyhow, so you must remember you must satisfy certain ATC criteria, or should I say VMC criteria. Okay, so hopefully that sort of clears up with the Class Charlie. As a pilot, doesn't matter whether VFR or IFR, you definitely need a clearance. So know your airspace. Get to know, these VTC charts, we're lucky in Australia, we get them for nothing. You must know exactly at what point you come into airspace. So there's no excuses. If you're a young pilot or a new pilot, get a hold of this, and it's very easy. You look under what they call the AIP, Aeronautic Information Package. You scroll down, you agree, you go to charts and VTC, and you got all the terminal charts all around Australia, and you can download that. So before you take off and decide to fly, willy-nilly somewhere, download this. Okay, so Class Charlie. All right, now the next one, which causes a lot of angst amongst people, that is the Class Delta. Okay, and you can see around Avalon here, you got Class Delta from surface to 2,500, and it's got this weird shape. So you got Class Delta, this weird shape, 8 nautical miles, Avalon, aerodrome reference point. Now, if I'm a VFR aircraft and I want to go, say, 2,500, so that means I'm flying into Class Delta airspace, I need a clearance. You cannot go into Class Delta airspace without a clearance. Okay, so you must obtain a clearance to transit or get into that zone. Now, and that applies to IFR aircraft. So, now the thing is, if you're a VFR aircraft and you're flying to the Class Delta airspace, you are not provided with any separation by ATC. If you're an IFR, of course, you are provided with separation. So beware of that as in a Class Delta airspace, you're provided, as a VFR aircraft, you're not provided with separation. And you see here around Broome, you can see once again this is a procedural airspace, or should I say Broome is what they call a procedural tower. So there's someone in the tower that provides a control service. They provide an approach and control service, and they provide approach control service to the IFR aircraft, but they don't provide any separation for VFR aircraft. In other words, VFR aircraft have to track in and via these VFR reporting points, and they will be given traffic information about other IFR aircraft, but they're not separated. Now, if you're an IFR, of course, you're separated. But you can see here the delta. So in the Broome control zone, class Delta, it's very similar to class Charlie. So surface to 2,609 nautical miles around Broome, and then the next step up is lowest level is 1,000, and then the next step up at 18 DME is 2.5, and so on. So it's like a class Charlie, but it's class Delta. Now, for VFR aircraft, the meteorological condition, the VMC condition changes. As we saw with the class Charlie, if you're above 10,000, it has to be 8 kilometres. Below 10,000, 5,000 metres. With class Delta, it doesn't matter what level you're at, you've got to have at least a visibility of 5,000 metres. Now, and in class Delta, you've got to be at least 600 metres horizontal separation from any cloud, 1,000 feet vertical above cloud, or 500 feet vertical below cloud, which is different to class Charlie. In class Charlie, it's more restricted. You've got to be at least 1,000 feet vertical, but whereas in class Delta, you only need to be 500 feet vertical below cloud, and 1,000 feet vertical above cloud. Class Delta is very similar to class Charlie. There's 250 knots indicated airspeed restriction. So the major difference, and you require clearance, of course, but the main difference is that between IFR and VFR is the VFR aircraft are not separated. There is no separation provided. Okay? They would just be told about other traffic and other IFR aircraft. So that's a class Delta. Okay, so that leaves me with the last one, class Echo. Well, class Echo is a bit of a funny one. It's a sort of between. This is what they call a TAC chart, and once again, this is more or less what you use if you're an IFR aircraft. And you can see here is sort of summed up. You see that, we'll zoom in a bit, you can see Broome, and before we had the visual terminal chart, that's if you're a VFR, but if you're an IFR, you can see here, this shows you beautifully what your levels are. So here you can see what they call the Echo airspace, and that's basically what's between class Alpha and class Charlie. So you can see here all around Broome, you've got mostly class Delta, and then past 25 nautical miles, you start getting into the Echo, and the Echo is lowest level between 31 nautical miles Broome and 40, the lowest level is 6,500, and then past 40, the Echo lowest level is 8,500. So Echo is in this between 40 and 50 nautical miles from Broome. Echo goes from 8,500 up to flight level 240. So between 9,000 and 240, you class Echo. And now, class Echo, what sort of service do you have in class Echo? Well, you need a clearance. That's the first thing. And if you're an IFR aircraft, you need a clearance. Whereas if you're a VFR aircraft, you don't need a clearance. Okay. You are separated as an IFR aircraft. You are separated from other IFR aircraft. And also, so ATC service gives you traffic information also about other known VFR aircraft. Okay. Now, if you're a VFR aircraft, You don't need a clearance to fly in this area, in the Class Echo, and you're not provided with any separation. So Class Delta and Class Echo, VFR, no separation required, no separation provided. Now, if you're a Class Echo, however, VFR aircraft, that doesn't mean, if you're a VFR aircraft, doesn't mean you've afforded no ATC service. You can, on request, you can ask for what they call Surveillance Information Service, SIS for abbreviation, and flight following. Okay, in other words, once again, like we talked in plan in Class Golf, it depends on ATC workload. They may give it to you, they may not. Class Echo is the visual meteorological conditions to operate in Class Echo is exactly like Class Delta. In other words, 8 kilometres if you're above 10,000 feet, 8 kilometres, visibility above 10,000, 5,000 metres below 10,000, and you have to be at least 1,500 metres horizontal distance from cloud or 1,000 feet vertical distant from cloud to operate in the Class Echo airspace. So you can see that it's quite demanding trying to, remember all this. But if you remember the services that are provided, and I think if you can get your head around what services are provided, and if you do or do not need a clearance, you can sort of make some sort of a guesstimate as to what sort of radio calls you need to make. So I think that basically sums up the services. And also, before I go, there's also, I just want to, if you can, always remember to look at the facilities. So here we got Broome, and as I said previously, and if you want to know what sort of service that is provided by that particular, let's say for example we want to fly and I've got VATSPY open here, I'll bring it over, and you can see that, well, there's not much ATC happening, you only got Sydney Tower going on. Oh, okay, and you got someone here at Brisbane Centre. Brisbane Centre. Now, I'm just trying to think where Broome is now. I think it's up here, or maybe not. That's Karratha. Oh, that's Learmonth. Karratha's there, sorry. Learmonth's there. If you see Broome Tower online, then you know you're provided with the service. But if you don't see Broome Tower online, and you can see that obviously there's no service available, but if you want to know what sort of service is provided in real life by that particular airport, what you do, you scroll down here and you look at this part here, ATC and aerodrome facilities. And you can see here you've got FAI Brisbane Centre, and it says here, Brisbane Centre 12395 on the ground, outside Towers hours. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means if you're an IFR aircraft, when the tower closes down and they all go home, if you're an IFR aircraft, you're still provided with service, and you're provided with Brisbane Centre basically looks after you, and they will give you a clearance to go from Broome to wherever you want to go, and they will be looking after you. They will be providing, if an IFR aircraft, they will be providing traffic information, separation, all that sort of stuff. So the first thing you do, you give your taxi call, Brisbane Centre, November Foxtrot India, taxis for runway 10 Broome, for departure to the west, east, whatever. And they'll give you an IFR, they'll give you a scorecode and what traffic is around. Now also, of course, outside towers hours, there might be people on VFR, and so you need to obviously do a CTAF transmission as well, because people on the CTAF, they might be doing their jollies, or you might have aircraft, VFR aircraft coming into the control zone. They need to hear about what you're doing. So you can see here the tower hours. You can see at a certain time they all close down, and so they operate Sunday to Friday those hours, and Saturday those hours. And now this is the most important part. That's how you know when a tower provides what they call, within Class D and Class E, below 5,000, they provide tower and approach control services. In other words, they will separate you procedurally. So they will separate if you're inbound an IFR aircraft, and like I said, procedural separations is a bit of a headache. It does your head in. But they will separate you from other aircraft, and they use what they either distance or time, and they'll ask you to, reach a certain point, certain altitude, or I should say a certain point at a certain altitude, or reach a certain point by time something, because they know somebody's inbound, or they might get you to track, 15 degrees left of track, or whatever they need to do. Because even though they may have the radar in the tower, but they can't use that. They have to use procedural. There is no radar separation. They're not like the guy that sits in approach control, in some room somewhere and can see everything on radar. These guys can't. They use their combination of sight. They look out the tower and then they write things down on their flight strip, So if you're estimating a time at a point at time such and such, they write it down, and then they use procedural separation. But anyhow, I won't go into that too much. So, and once again, it's so you can see that, and also what I wanted to touch on, now, Broome is one of several, what they say, procedural towers. Another one is Hobart, comes to mind. Launceston, another one. Sunshine Coast is another one. I used to know them all, but anyhow. But there's certain, but always look at the FAC, the facilities chart, and always go down here and find out what facilities are included. And also, there's another thing too. Also be aware of what sort of radio navigation. Notice that Broome has a VOR, but it's only DME. Only gives you DME information. It doesn't give you radial. So you've got an NDB at Broome on frequency 320, and you've got only, if you tune into what that frequency for Broome 115.3, or if you're a military aircraft, that channel, it will give you DME distance, but it will not give you the radial that you're on, whereas other airports. So also be aware of that. So if you're tuning that and you're not getting any VO or radial information, well, you know why, don't you? Because it only gives you DME. And once again, I think I've mentioned this in another one, there's VORs, not all VORs give you radial information. Some just give you DME. Okay, so hopefully I've covered everything. I've been going for half an hour. So if there's any questions, put it in the chat or whatever. And until next time, see you all later. Cheers.